What's up, everybody? Did you know somebody already wrote the book on how to be happy? Have you ever wondered about how to be wise? What the good life is? And I think you're in luck because today we're going to talk about the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle.
Ooh, this might be another book in the philosophy books for beginners series, or for people who just don't want to read the book, or who might have heard about the book, or people who just love to listen to our podcast and love to listen to us talk and joke and laugh, all of that fun stuff.
I always thought of it as the books you should read thing.
Well,
I don't know. Whatever. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. It's arbitrary, right? It's just a name and a label. It doesn't matter. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. It's the Existential Stoic Podcast, episode 115. I'm Danny. My buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
hey, Danny.
Yeah, so this is like obviously a classic work in philosophy. Aristotle's literally one of the pillars of the Western tradition. So, he is definitely important. And it's funny, I've always found, I should say, I've always found his writing's pretty easy. I think he's one of the clearer individuals in philosophy to follow. He's pretty straightforward and he really does bring home points. So that's a good thing. I think if you do want to try reading, I think it's definitely accessible.
And also his lineage. I mean, Socrates, who's arguably the smartest guy that anybody has ever known, and then Plato, and then Aristotle. So he's like,
Yeah, that's
great
true,
lineage.
right? He comes from good stock.
So he might know what he's talking about. I guess we could say that.
I mean, he tutored Alexander the Great. He did all right,
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty
Yeah.
good. Pretty good.
Yeah, so the Nicomachean Ethics is a cool work, though. I think it was originally, if I remember correctly, like lecture notes or a lecture that he gave. But it's a practical work. It's a work of practical philosophy. Really, he sets out to both sort of identify and think and really explore what is the good life, what is happiness, right? And then he tries to sort of define it and then understand how do we get there. I mean, it really is almost like, in a sense, it's almost written like a handbook for this is how you would basically live your life to become happy and to become, to flourish, essentially. Because really, I guess, the Greek word's eudaimonia, which is a flourishing life. We usually translate it happiness, but I think, similar connotations, right? Being
Yeah.
successful, happy, well-being, all those things.
Well, yeah. I mean, I like that he focuses on happiness, because when you kind of like dig deep down, that's pretty much what we're all going after. Like, people think we have different goals. Like, we're like, no, but I need to get into the good university, or no, I need like this many followers on Instagram, or no, I need like, you know, I need the new Tesla, or whatever it is. And we think we need these things, but really we want these things because we think they'll bring us this feeling of happiness. So kind of cutting out the middleman and pursuing happiness initially, that kind of goes after the thing. And also, the happiness that he talks about is the eudaimonia, which is kind of more of a broader sense than like what we imagine happiness is, just like this pleasure feeling. And it's more of like a good soul, good life, that type of thing, as opposed to just like, oh, pleasure. 100%. I just imagine these people. I just want to be happy all the time, just like, and it's like, yeah, there are people. They're in mental institutions.
Yeah. It's a funny thing because, like, I always thought we had a weird notion of happiness, right? Because it's like this. We all think of it as like those moments of really joy and like excitement, but you could not maintain that. And I mean, there's no way that would just persist. So obviously, life's gonna have good and bad moments. So what does it mean to have a good life or a happy life? I like the idea of a good life a little bit more because I think it kind of gets rid of that weird problem with happiness where we tend to think of it as just like an intense pleasure. But yeah, eudaimonia is good because I think it is. It's like flourishing, right? It's finding balance, doing well, succeeding in what you pursue, all that stuff. So I think it's a really cool work, and Aristotle is definitely very interesting. So I think, what do you think? Where do you want to start? You want to start with virtue or something else, or
Well, yeah.
where should we go?
So at least when I was looking at this book, the three things that kind of stand out to me in the book are happiness, virtue, and wisdom. He talks about them a lot. They're kind of intertwined. And I think, at least to me, that was kind of like one of the core themes of this book, where if you get out of it happiness, virtue, and wisdom, you've probably picked up a lot of what you need to. Um, so
Figured that,
like,
they're definitely
yes,
important.
yeah. And like they're kind of intertwined, how like happiness depends on virtue, and then being virtuous depends on wisdom. And so it's kind of like you need one to get to the other. So I guess we could kind of start with uh the end goal would be
All right.
happiness. Why don't we start with virtue, like the golden mean, that type of
Okay.
thing?
Yeah, let's start there. That sounds
Because I
good.
think
Yeah, I
I think
think
if you were to say like one topic that you need to know about this book, that's what I would say. If there was one thing you got out of this book, period, the golden mean, and you'd be set.
yeah, the golden mean is super important, right? Because for Aristotle, he's obviously right. This is virtue ethics. He's an ancient Greek. You know, virtue ethics is really about character, right? It's about developing the right character, and for virtue ethics, it's really for Aristotle. So right action flows from right character. So when you have the right character traits developed, you're going to do the right thing, right? That's the important thing. So how do you get there? That's the question, and
Well,
that's where he comes up with
I
this.
re-
Yo, you go.
I
Go
remember
ahead.
the first time you taught me this on this podcast. If you guys
Yeah,
listen back to episodes like 1 through 5 or something, somewhere in there, Danny talked to me about it. How basically like finding virtue is kind of finding the golden mean between excess and deficiency. You kind of
yeah,
have to strike the mean, and it's going to be different for everyone, and it's going
it
to be different
is.
for every virtue as well. And one of the things that I really liked that he said is like, if you know you lean one way, you should try to push the other way intentionally, which is two things. Because one, it's knowing yourself. And then
Yeah.
two, it's actually like doing the thing that comes unnaturally to you, but doing that more, which will help you strike that golden mean.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, right? And I always like that idea that, every the virtue is the middle with two vices, that excess and deficiency, because it does give you a better sense of like what you're aiming for is really this balance. You're aiming for that middle state, right? The sort of middle between both extremes, because that's where you're going to find balance, you're going to find self-control, you're going to find really, like being able to act the way you think or the right way all the time. And like you said, right, we all have one tendency towards one extreme or the other. So really, we have to know ourselves deeply. And I think that's one of the interesting things about virtue ethics in general is it's about character. So it's really about character perfection, right? It's about working on ourselves and making ourselves the best self we can be, ultimately. Yeah.
I like how he talks about the called arete in there, where excellence in character, because like the word excellence just does something for me. It
Yeah.
because it's like you have to have a good character. Like I've read Ben Franklin's autobiography, and he talks about having building up virtues and having a character and everything. But then like excellence of character, at least in my mind, it brings it to a whole another level, because it's just like you don't settle when you desire excellence in character. It means you need to go after it again and again and again. And it's not just this one time thing that you do where everybody's looking for this quick fix that they'll just do it. But it's not just this one time thing. It's this thing that you're constantly doing, that you're constantly getting better at. Every time you do it, you're getting a little bit better. And after time, you're going to be able to be as close to excellent as one can be.
Yeah, I do like that notion too, because it's like it really does kind of remind you too that it's like an ideal, right? That if you are virtuous, if you develop virtues, you're going to do this theoretically all the time and in the right way, and that's the excellence. So yeah, it's something that's a lifelong pursuit. It's not like you all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I'm virtuous, I'm done, I don't have to do anything anymore, I don't have to work on myself, I'm good, right? Because there's always going to be, I mean, I think one way to look at that too is there's always going to be temptations to pull us into one of the extremes throughout life. And those temptations might change as our circumstance change, as we change. And so we're always going to be confronted with choices where we have to decide choose the right thing. And that's going to require us having, really the self-control and really for Aristotle, right, through rational development that enables us to then see what's right, choose it, and really conform our character in that way and develop those dispositions.
Mhm. And you mentioned something in there about right action with virtue.
Yeah.
And this is something that when I read it, it reminded me of when I was like studying Buddhism, because I don't remember, I think it's like the Eightfold Path or something along those
The
lines
Noble
where
Eightfold Path. Yeah.
yeah, I think right action is one of those. And this is something that oftentimes in life I struggle with, because there's things that I want to do, but I'm like, is this the right time? Is this the right way that I'm going about it? Is this correct for that person as well? So it's like trying to really determine, is this the correct time? Because I know right now I want to get it off my chest and I want to do this. But is this really, if I do it now, is this going to be the best way to go about doing it? And so that, I think, also goes hand in hand with virtue, because it really is trying to find the excellence in what you're doing, trying to find the best that can come out of it.
Yeah, it's funny. I always thought of the I don't know why, but I always like thinking of the excellence too as like trying to be an excellent representation either of what you could be or like of a human being. I always like that notion too because it helps me think of that in the ideal sense. But you're right, like that notion of like choosing what's right, I think is way harder than people think it is or would be. And I think if you really think about yourself, trying to know yourself, trying to understand what you want, what's valuable, and trying to live your life in the right way, like you find that like it is, you run into all these situations all the time where it's like it's not always clear what the right thing is, and it takes a lot of effort to figure it out, and you're not always sure. And this for Aristotle too is where that wisdom comes in, right? Because part of like wisdom, which is something again that takes a long time to develop, you're always working on it, is having that knowledge, right? Having that those reasons, knowing what you're doing and knowing what's right. And that's the other kind of side that goes with it. It's really important.
Yeah. And, like wisdom is something that's really interesting because I think from the Bible, it was Solomon who like asked for wisdom, and that made him one of the smartest people ever. But also like, wisdom is something that comes from living life. And
Oh yeah.
there's a saying that I'm just going to botch it right now, but it's something like good judgment comes from experience and bad judgment, something like that. And so like this like wisdom that we're all after, we want the good of wisdom without going through the pain, but it's going through that pain is actually what gives us the wisdom, because then we feel how bad it is to make the wrong decision, and in the future we actually want to make the right decision.
Yeah, and it's funny too because there's like no shortcut to wisdom, right? You're right. I mean, like it is one of those things where like you need time. You're not just gonna like all of a sudden be wise. It doesn't work that way. It's something where you need like accumulation of experience. You need to know yourself deeply, which is one really hard, and we all struggle with it, I think. It's difficult. You need to understand, how things work, relationships, all these different facets of life, and then take all of that and be able to be mature, self-controlled, and understand what the right thing to do is, even when it's contrary to maybe like whatever your interests are at the time or something like that.
Well, I think that's one of the biggest tragedies of the modern age is people think that they're supposed to have it all figured out by the time they're 20. And if they
Yeah.
don't, then they've messed up their whole entire life. And from everything I read, like Think and Grow
Yeah.
Rich, all these other books, they've proven time and time again that most people don't even hit their stride until 40 to 60 years old. And all these kids nowadays are getting completely upset because they're not rich as Zuck by the time they're 26, and they end up, doing something crazy. Meanwhile, they haven't even had enough time to like build up enough experience to really just figure out what they like in life. Like probably if you had the amount of money that Zuck had, it would ruin your life. You wouldn't know how to handle it. And you're like, well, I'd like to try anyways. And most people would, but
yeah. I mean, who wouldn't? Yeah, right. Well, it's funny
well,
too,
actually,
right? I think.
oh,
Okay.
can I just add one more thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm reading this this new biography of Will Smith because I've followed him for a
Oh, I
long
saw
time.
that the other day. Didn't that just come out recently or something?
Fantastic book.
Is it?
Like really, yeah. Because Will Smith himself is an amazing guy, and then this biography is just spot on.
Oh man, I'll have to check it
but
out then.
but he was talking about money because like everybody's like, yeah, like I know people say money doesn't make you happy, but like I want to at least try. And he says in the book, like he grew up poor, like very, very poor from West Philly. And eventually he got to a point where he had all his money and he thought his whole life that money would make him happy. And then once he got the money, he realized he still wasn't happy. And then all of a sudden you're stuck with the realization that it's not the money and the things, it's actually you, that you're the problem. And then that's when like the real learning takes place. So like Yeah, if you want to get money, sure, go after money, get it, but then get it and realize that, uh-oh, that's not it.
Well, I think that's that, it's, and this is like, I think this works well with Aristotle too, or really any philosopher too. It's also about knowing what's really valuable. And like, for most people, I think a lot of us, we look at money, the pursuit of wealth as really the sole thing in life that validates our existence, the thing that we look at it as like a cure-all, right? And people think like if I have all the money, I can just get all the stuff I want and then everything will be great. But it's like you said, right? Is that really the valuable thing? Is that really the thing that's causing the problems? And understanding that and understanding what's valuable is not always an easy thing. That's where it takes, right? That's wisdom. That takes, right, experience. That takes learning these things over time and a lot of self-reflection and a lot of really questioning. And I think starting to engage in that as soon as you can will help you get there and help you get to the point where you can kind of hopefully see things for how they are and how they will influence you in the right way.
Yeah. And I think, with wisdom, at least I'm starting to get this understanding that with every blessing comes a burden. Like I never thought that when I was younger. I always just saw the blessing and I
Yeah.
never, I never looked for the burden. But as I'm getting older, I start to see that like every blessing, even though it may be great, there's going to be something that comes along with it. Probably you're not expecting it. And it's gonna be like, maybe not so great. And so, but like that's part of the wisdom that comes that you'll yeah, you'll get to realize that maybe being somewhere other than where you are right now isn't going to be any better.
Well, I think, yeah, and it's interesting too, because I think part of, for Aristotle, that pursuing the good life or eudaimonia, and developing virtue is about developing this balanced state, right? Being in self-control. And part of the reason that he thinks this is so important is that once we have that self-control, that balance, we know who we are essentially, right? We have a firm character. And so even when our boat is rocked by the ups and downs in life, we're going to be more stable and we're going to handle them better. We're going to deal with them in a healthy way. It's not going to throw us off course. It's not going to cause us to sort of lose ourselves entirely. And I think that's one of the other crucial things is that he's focused on is really this idea of working on ourselves, our character, understanding, working on what we know, trying to become wise so that ultimately we can navigate life more effectively and still sort of not be thrown all over by it. So we handle things, well, because I think for a lot of people too, that's the other problem is, you think things are going to be solved and then you find out there's, some tragedy happens or a circumstance or, something in the environment happens. It changes, suddenly your world or makes things worse. And that can be really difficult to get through. But if you're kind of know yourself and you're already secure and have control, you're fine. You'll be able to manage through it and find the best way.
Well, I like how you talk about that with dealing with these external circumstances because he talked about that a lot in the book, how like doing all this stuff in terms of ethics and excellence and character and all that stuff. He says, we have to do it with ourselves, but also we have to realize that we're doing it in a political nature with the city, with
Yeah.
family, with friends, everything else as well. And oftentimes I think people get confused, like, or maybe I just get confused. Like, I had this fantasy about going to a mountain and, like, becoming enlightened, and then all problems would be solved. Like, that was this fantasy. I just fix it all. But it's kind of like once Zarathustra comes down from the mountain, he has to deal with all
Yeah.
these people and all these problems and everything. Like it is, and so
Yeah.
actually, even though dealing with stuff outside of yourself can be difficult, it's actually almost a practice in honing your virtue. And then you becoming a virtuous person and someone of character actually adds tremendous value back to all those communities you're involved in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, he even points out too that, it's through those relationships, right? With friends, through our political relationships, as he says, so like connections and stuff, we can actually do more through our good acts too. We can influence or affect more things or create more good in our community when we also have others that we can rely on when we're doing those good things. Right. And I think that's an important part as well. So it is about just not yourself, but also, ultimately, right, the community, the world, society betters when we all try to be virtuous as well. And, he thought we were. I mean, Aristotle thought we're rational creatures, and he thought we were social or political, right? I mean, that's the other side of it, and that seems fairly true. you know, you look at the world.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And also you mentioned on friendships. And I mean, that's something that definitely makes a huge difference. Like I know just our friendship has blossomed over the past few years. Like we've been friends for a
Oh
long
yeah.
time, but just being able to do this together has definitely increased our friendship and our knowledge of each other and our being able to communicate about stuff and just our growth, both of our growth.
Oh yeah, it's right. It's having being able to dedicate the time too. And I think, Aristotle is interesting because he identifies like three kinds of friendship, right? He has, well, the first two are really, he calls them incidental. They're like acquaintances, like people you run into at the convenience store or something all the time, things like that. People that are in your world. But then he identifies perfect friendship or true friendship. And yeah, those are the ones that are really important. But he even points out that they're hard to maintain. It takes effort because it takes really knowing someone, really caring about them, really loving them for their own sake, not just trying to get something out of the relationship, but actually like, it's a relationship where both people grow and develop, become better because of it. He says, through these really good relationships, we get a training in virtue, meaning, we get an opportunity to not only sort of see ourselves and how we act, but we can see our friends. You have an external person you can kind of look at, and they can do the same for you. And that can help you by giving you good advice and help you sort of get to that virtuous state or progress more effectively in virtue. And I think that's really cool too. The importance of relationships for Aristotle is, crucial.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to ask you is so he talks a lot about how we're social and how we're rational. Now, I believe that stuff. I also feel that we are extremely emotional creatures.
Yeah.
Did you like how did how do you I mean, I know um how I bring those things together. I just assume that people are emotional way before they're ever rational. But like
Oh yeah.
did he touch on that in here?
I mean, yeah, we are. We're definitely emotional, probably way before we're rational. That's true. I think look, I mean, this has always been one of the points where I kind of deviate, I guess, a little bit from. But I think one way to look at it is, our emotions, he thought, essentially are really going to pull us in the irrational side, right? They're going to cause us to act in ways that are not controlled. They're not smart. It's not from a consistent character because we're letting our emotions sort of dictate things, right? Go out of control. So I think one way to understand it maybe is that through virtuous development, part of that is also learning to sort of maybe express and feel our emotions both in a healthy way, but also rationally. So not letting ourselves sort of get completely thrown off course because we're jealous one day or one moment, or not, or even just having the self control to be like, okay, I shouldn't act on this. I should think this through and settle down first because I'll do something stupid, right? And I think that's really what he means, having that ability to sort of rein in your emotions with reason sometimes, but also understand them and understand that it's sort of this response that doesn't have anything logical behind it. So it's okay to express them, and there's ways to express them healthy, but we shouldn't just live our lives by them, right?
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, kind of like balancing emotion with the virtues as well and finding the
Yeah.
golden mean because the emotion will throw you towards either of the vices. You like want that pleasure right now, you're going for the vices or like whatever it may be, or you're jealous right now, and that's just the emotions throwing off kilter. And then what he mentioned earlier with recognizing that you tend towards that way and recognizing when it comes up in your life and then going in the opposite direction to help get you back towards the mean.
Well, that's a good point too, right? I mean, even that our emotions could be one of those factors that cause us to tend to one extreme or the other, right? I mean, we could be somebody that tends towards anger or something, and that leads to something else, right? So you need to kind of rein that in, and it's going to be harder, especially when those are that's the case. I think it's going to be harder for people in those cases, and knowing that can help you kind of get there, or seek maybe the kind of help you need, because I think it's that practice that's important for Aristotle too, doing these things
Mm-hmm.
over and over until we get them right.
Mm-hmm. So does it would it then be safe to say that if you just focus on building up a character, focus on a virtuous life, would you then have a good life? Would you
Oh
then
yeah,
be happy?
That's a good question. I think Aristotle, I think that where the Stoics are kind of lean more that way, I think Aristotle actually he thinks virtue's absolutely crucial for a good life, but that it's not everything. And he thinks he takes a very practical approach in the sense that he thinks you need other things, namely like other goods. So you need, successful career or whatever to develop your talents, friends. He thinks friendship's important. He thinks the greatest external good. So there are things in our lives that can, influence whether or not we have a good life. And he even raises, at one point in the book, he even raises an interesting question, which is namely like, if somebody was virtuous but suffered from like misfortune after misfortune just because of chance, right? Just like chance events, it's not clear that we would call them happy or we would call their life good, even though they're virtuous, right? Because it's just like that's not Aristotle. He's like, it's not a good life. It's just not like even though they're doing everything right, and I think that's interesting because it's like he also recognizes that even if you do everything absolutely right, it's still possible that it just might not work out. And I think
That's
I always found that kind of fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. It does rely on a little bit of chance or luck or whatever it is. Because even, I mean, even in a totally random universe, you could just, get tails up 100 times in a row. It's highly unlikely, but
It,
it could happen.
it is. And I think that's the point is like, I think part of it too is like, look, obviously you can do a ton to change things. You can make things happen. You have a lot of control. But the world is the world and the world is sort of indifferent also in some sense. So yeah, things might also happen that we can't control or don't have the power to, maybe dictate how it's going to play out. And that's just life as well. So yeah, but I think, nevertheless, developing virtue and developing that firm character will at least help us no matter what. I still think he thinks it's absolutely the right thing to do and good for us because then we're not kind of, we have, we live intentionally, we live a life that's a life we choose, and we're making decisions rather than letting those decisions sort of be made by other factors.
Yeah. And another thing that I like about it is he makes it very clear that it's not really a destination at all. It's going to be a journey the whole entire way. Like when I read excellence, I think, it's going to be a journey. Also with the golden mean, it's going to be a journey. And like all of these things is going to be a journey. And Earl Nightingale says something along the lines of like success is a person who's going after a clearly defined, a worthy ideal, the pursuit of a worthy ideal. And so it is kind of like this going after it because when you have something worthwhile that you're working towards and you know why you're working towards it, well, then you're going to face obstacles. All of us are going to face obstacles all the time. The only people without problems are dead.
Yeah.
But the thing is, every time you have a problem, it gives you a chance to get over that problem. And then when you get over that problem, you feel good. You get closer to that thing that you really want. And the harder you have to work for it, when you finally get it, the more valuable it becomes.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, right? That it is. I mean, he makes it clear it's lifelong. This is not something where there's a goal that you sort of magically achieve. He thinks you can be obviously happy in this life and you can have a good life, but that the pursuit of wisdom and virtue and all and excellence really is something you just are constantly engaged in. I like that too, because it's also like, it's almost like with every action, or if you want to think about like with every day, you have this material to reflect on that can help you better understand for the next day how to do things better, right? Or how to do them right, or maybe where you kind of went wrong so you can course correct a little. And it's that constant sort of working on it. And you'll get better and better. And there'll be times, sure, where probably you won't, you'll definitely, hopefully develop some virtues and you won't have to, that side of you will be fixed and pretty established, but you never know what's going to happen. So there could always be something that can kind of push you or maybe challenge you that you'll have to get overcome.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a great point. Is how you're always building upon it, and like even if you think it's the same situation, like let's say you fail a class and you have to take it over again or something, you're not the same person when you're taking it over again because you've learned the stuff you've learned, you've had the life experiences you've had, time has progressed. You may have a different teacher, you may be feeling different. Like there's all these things, and it's just kind of this progression that builds and builds and builds and builds. But you got to make sure that building is the direction that you want it to go instead of just this calamity of
Yeah.
vices just thrust upon you.
Yeah, well, and I think that's true, right? Because when you do that and you start getting it to go in the direction you want, right? I think that's where that flourishing and happiness comes from too, is it just starts to be a lot better and clearer, and the goals are what you want, and things just start lining up over time, which I think is really ultimately right important.
Mm. And then being grateful for them when they come.
Oh yeah,
Definitely, 100%. That makes
always
a big
grateful.
difference.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it does make a big difference. I like it though. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I
Mhm.
think it's funny how like the ancient thinkers you always see where it's like this lifelong pursuit. There's never a question that like you were gonna reach the ideal. I don't think that any of them ever did. And it's like so it's funny to think that like we would assume we would kind of like be
It's
perfect
so
at some
young.
point, right?
Well,
Yeah.
you know how it started, I think, with Doogie Howser, MD. You remember that
Yeah.
TV? Like a 12-year-old doctor. Everybody's like, oh my God, a 12-year-old doctor. How come you're not a doctor at 12? Life ruined. And that was the
Yeah.
beginning of the end.
Dressing like all the Silicon Valley CEOs, right? In sneakers and jeans and stuff. It was yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
God. Yeah, it is funny. It's like that, like everybody wants those natural gifts to where they're like this like rock star instantly. It's like, but then then that can be controlling in your life,
See,
right? And you might not even want
I
it.
always, dude, I always look at it like MC Hammer. I don't ever want to be MC Hammer because he went like boo, burn out,
Yeah.
and then all the way back down. Like he went high as can be very early,
Yeah.
and then just woo straight down since then. So I think is if for some people, for very few people, and those are the people we always think that like, oh, that's like the Zuckerberg, the Elon Musk, the Will Smith, like all these people, they went up and then they were able to maintain it. But like most people who go up that high just come right back down, and then they peak very early. So I think kind of just with this idea of pursuing virtue, it's a sustainable process, but it's kind of always going up.
Yeah. I like that way. Yeah, it's a progression, right? Or it should be, hopefully. I like to, it's funny. Like I think when we look at those like rare examples too, we don't see the whole example. We don't see the whole person. And like you said, like with Will
Dude,
Smith, like right, like if I just thought about Will Smith's life, I would think of like a pretty much a steady rise, right? But in reality, like you said, if he probably got the money, and then there's probably a really low point where he's still depressed, and then now he's probably going back up again, right? Because he's
dude,
figured it out.
he made millions and then got depressed, and then he was millions in the hole because he blew all his money
Yeah,
and didn't pay any money to the IRS. And then he built it all back up again. But like
yeah,
that's why I love reading biographies, because it's these
yeah.
things you would never ever like. Everybody thinks that it's just sunshine and rainbows, like it's just perfect life all the time. But you hear all these celebrities who are just depressed, who are having miserable
Oh
lives,
yeah, yeah,
because once you get everything, like once you literally get everything, that's like the worst curse, because then nothing really has any value, and you realize that your life sucks not because you don't have that thing you think you need. Your life sucks because of you, and that just really sucks.
because the
So
thing you thought you
that's
need isn't the thing you need. And
and that is when you need the book Nicomachean
yeah,
Ethics.
you really do. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's so true, man. I think it's like because we only see really a surface thing with those examples, and I think that's what I do. I love these kind of works because Aristotle, it's like it's really reminding yourself how hard it is and how difficult, but how rewarding too at the same time. And I think that's really the important thing. So, it takes all this work on ourselves because ultimately that's what will make us happy, know it's valuable, understand what we're pursuing, and not be surprised by these things in the future, rather than doing it the wrong way.
Definitely. Cool. So anything else you want to touch on in the book?
No, I think it's a great book. I think we should read it. It's good, right? And if you don't want
Mm-hmm.
to, this will at least give you a good overview of some of the main points, which is sometimes all you need.
Yeah, definitely. You can participate in your class conversations with all the stuff
Yeah.
we just told you, but read the book. It's a good one, especially if you want to live a happy life and understand virtue
Oh,
and
yeah.
character and all that stuff.
Yeah, so that's it. So this is episode 115 of the Nicomachean Ethics by Aristotle. So this is I don't remember which number, maybe fourth books you should read or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll have more. So don't worry. Come back, check us out midweek for another quick fix. Watch us on YouTube, listen, and please, share with your friends, click subscribe, all that stuff. We'll be back later though. Until then, later, Andy.
Later, Danny.